Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. The revelations just keep on coming. Prince Harry says he wants to reconcile with his family, despite making a stream of sensational claims in his new memoir, laying bare the depth of the rift with his brother and the royals. Well, Sky News has obtained a copy of the book, accidentally put on sale in Spain, and read it cover to cover. We'll bring you analysis of the key revelations, including how he sought a fresh investigation into his mother's death and the security questions raised by sharing the number of people he killed while serving in Afghanistan. It's Friday, the 6th of January. Beloved brother and arch nemesis, the royal rift laid bare. Sky News obtains a copy of Prince Harry's memoir.
I talk about the red mist that I had for so many years, and I saw this red mist in him. He wanted me to hit him back, but I chose not to.
Teenage drug use, Afghanistan, and his fight for justice for Diana, just some of the previously unheard revelations.
I'll have the latest from Buckingham Palace on what it all means for the royals, who for now are staying silent.
And I'll have the latest from Ukraine, where President Zelensky has rejected a Russian call for a 36-hour ceasefire to mark Orthodox Christmas.
Rail passengers face another day of disruption as train workers stage a fresh 48-hour walkout, with only 1 in 5 services running.
In the Premier League, Manchester City put the pressure back on Arsenal with a 1-0 win against Chelsea. Trust your gut. I'll speak to the scientist and author Tim Spector about what we should actually be doing to keep our bodies healthy. In the weather, most places look mild and fine today, but there'll be some blustery showers around, mainly over Scotland, where early severe gales are possible in the north. Hello, good morning and welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Now, Prince Harry has insisted that he wants to reconcile with his family after describing his brother as his arch nemesis in a jaw-dropping memoir, exposing just how fractured his relationship is with the royal family. Well, Sky News has read the entire book, Spare, which was accidentally put on sale briefly in Spain before its release date next week. Well, in the memoir, Prince Harry makes a series of devastating revelations, including how he urged his father not to marry Camilla, how he was told about Diana's death, and even replicated his mother's final journey in Paris. But some of his claims have prompted renewed questions about security after Prince Harry shared details of his military record while serving in Afghanistan. So let's take a look at some of the key revelations. Harry says that he wanted the investigation into the death of his mother, Princess Diana, to be reopened and for more people to be held accountable. He also says that he and Prince William asked their father, King Charles, not to marry Camilla. Writing about his time serving in Afghanistan, Harry says he killed 25 Taliban fighters. He also talks about his teenage drug use, saying he used cocaine for the first time when he was 17. Amongst the most sensational claims is of an alleged physical confrontation with William. Harry says his brother knocked him to the floor in 2019. And Harry says when his father called him about the Queen's ill health in September, the soon-to-be king told him that Meghan wasn't welcome at Balmoral. Ashna Hurinak reports.
They were billed as the Fab Four to revolutionise the monarchy together. But any hope of that is now firmly gone, as damning allegations more personal than ever are in black and white. Sky News has read Prince Harry's entire new memoir. Among the cascade of bombshells, it reveals he asked for a fresh investigation into his mother's death, which was rejected. 10 years after her death, he chose to replicate her journey that night in Paris by asking a driver to take him through the same tunnel at 105 kilometres per hour.
I think what we're seeing here is a wounded individual. I mean, this is a man who hasn't had an easy life. He lost his mother. That wounded him, and he's weaponized that wound. he's in a bubble, and he's surrounded by people telling him what he needs to do, and surrounded by people who are obviously earning money on the back of what he's doing as well.
The book was on sale in Spain for a few hours by mistake. It includes how he didn't want his father, King Charles, to marry Camilla. Willie and I promised our father that we would welcome Camilla to the family. The only thing we asked for in return was that he didn't marry her. You don't need to get married again, we asked him. They agreed on that, but it's the differences between the two brothers which has had devastating consequences, with an accusation of a physical altercation between now two enemies.
What was different here was this level of frustration. And I talk about the red mist that I had for so many years, and I saw this red mist in him. He wanted me to hit him back, but I chose not to. I want reconciliation, but first there needs to be some accountability. The truth, supposedly at the moment, has been there's only one side to this story, right? But there's two sides to every story.
This is one of 4 television interviews to come, after the Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, and now a book. Any hope of peace seems far off. The king asked his sons to not make his final years a misery, but this rift won't make it easy. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
Well, with more on the revelations contained in the book, Sky's Katie Spencer is here with me. And we'll also be talking in just a moment to our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, who's at Buckingham Palace. But Katie, to you first of all, and you've got the book there. It's in Spanish, obtained from Spain, of course, and some extraordinary revelations within it. So what have we learned about Prince Harry, and perhaps even what insights do we get about why he's doing this?
Look, we've had this book for less than a day now, in Spanish, as you say, so the whole process has been translating it back into English so that we can work out the exact lines that this memoir contains. And I have to say, the level of detail that's contained in this book is extreme. The revelations that you have already mentioned today, we talk about, he talks about his teenage drug taking, being told of his mother's death, and also this physical altercation that he had with Prince William as well. But also just the level of oversharing in the extreme that this contains as well. You read this and you end up with details that you perhaps didn't even need to know, details about how he lost his virginity, details about whether or not he's been circumcised. He comes across very damaged at times. It's a very sad story, obviously, because of his background and what he's been through. He talks about the PTSD that he's experienced. He talks about having agoraphobia and also just the fact that he's needed therapy over the years, but also at times he comes across as being a bit petty and a bit petulant, catty even at times. He talks about his brother's hair loss being worse than his. He talks about his explanation for wearing the Nazi uniform to a friend's party. Within that apology, if you like, he also throws his brother and Kate under the bus by saying he told them in advance that he was going to do this. So it does feel you question perhaps the advice that he has been given in terms of how much he has shared. He even goes into details about the day that he met with his family when it was announced that the Queen died, going into the room and seeing his grandmother's body. So it is an incredible amount of detail that he shares here, and you do wonder really what the fallout will be in terms of his own mental health. Clearly he wanted to be an advocate for mental health, if you like, as well, and encourage people to talk about these things. But you do get the impression that certainly you wonder what peace he will find from sharing so much.
And some extraordinary revelations and transparency about his time in Afghanistan as well, which has raised some eyebrows.
Again, yes, because he talks about the amount of Taliban, members of the Taliban that he has killed. He says 25, and that in itself, for somebody that is so concerned about his family's privacy and protecting his family, if you look at the reaction that that's caused on Twitter within certain countries, he has effectively, if you like, put a target on his family's back in sharing so much. So, yeah, an incredible amount of detail in here.
Casey, thanks very much indeed. So let's bring in Laura Bundock, who's at Buckingham Palace for us this morning. So, Laura, some extraordinary revelations about himself, but also allegations against his family as well. So how might the palace react?
And that's the big question, isn't it? The publishers had always promised this unflinching honesty, but I don't think any member of the royal family would have expected the book to go just this far. I mean, these revelations are really raw. Harry is exposing those very private moments, these personal conversations in great details. Look, for now, we've had no reaction from either Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace, which manages the office of the Prince and Princess of Wales. But you do wonder, given the personal level of some of these revelations, how long they can hold the line of staying silent. They won't want to fan the flames of this feud any further. But at the same time, look, if we take, for example, the Oprah interview and the Netflix docuseries, Harry made accusations then without naming names. And this time he does. He really doesn't hold back. And, you know, on the one hand, you can say, well, here is Harry wanting to tell his side of the story, as he puts it. We know and we can see how much he struggled, losing his mother at such a young age and struggling really with the fact that William was more important. His older brother was the heir and here he was the spare. And yet at the same time, you have a prince with this hugely privileged platform, unable to deal with the role, the rules and the responsibilities of life inside the royal family. And the revelations are still coming. ITV have released a new trailer for their interview to be aired at the weekend, and Harry, describing that kitchen fight with Prince William, talks about the red mist that he said he's had over the years, but he saw the same red mist in William that day, and the fact that he said William looked at him and he wanted, as he puts it, me to hit him back. Harry resisted at that point. So we haven't heard anything from the royal family. That might change, because don't forget, the book isn't officially out until Tuesday. The palace will want to read it very carefully. And of course, Harry's got at least another 4 television interviews to be aired before then as well. So there could be even worse to come.
Indeed. Laura, this story will definitely roll on for the next few days, won't it? Thanks very much indeed. Well, as you'd expect, the royals feature heavily on this morning's front pages, so let's take you through a few of them. Put your dukes up. That's how the Daily Star reports the story of Prince Harry's new book, with he and William pictured in boxing gloves as the war of words between them escalates. According to The Express, there's now no chance of Harry being reconciled with his family because he's, quote, sold his soul. The Mirror features a picture from the days when the princes were at school together and good friends, but its headline reads, "It's all over now." Harry spills his secrets in devastating memoir. That's on the front of the Times. The Eye sums the story up as the worst crisis the UK monarchy has faced for 30 years. Ukraine has dismissed Russia's unilateral order for a 36-hour ceasefire as a trick. President Putin had told his troops to observe a truce from midday today to mark Orthodox Christmas. But Kiev says it won't be following suit, saying that Russia will only get a ceasefire when it leaves Ukrainian territory.
Now the Russians want to use Christmas as a cover to stop the advance of our guys in the Donbass for a while and to bring in equipment, ammunition and mobilise people closer to our positions. What will it result in? Just another increase in their losses.
Well, our international correspondent Alex Rossi joins me now from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. So President Zelensky, Alex, giving short shrift to this offer of a ceasefire from Russia.
Yeah, that's right. So Russia offered this ceasefire yesterday. It appears that it's going to be simply a unilateral ceasefire, if indeed it can go ahead at all, which, of course, is extremely questionable because you really need two sides to abide by it. Remember, the fighting along those hundreds of miles of the line of contact is extremely ferocious, and this war is extremely bitter. I don't think the Kremlin really thought that the Ukrainians would ever really give this much stock at all. Remember, of course, that cities like Kiev have been under attack now for many months, so there is a great deal of scepticism I think the thing to look out for, of course, is will there be attacks with cruise missiles, with drones? Now this ceasefire so-called ceasefire, has been implemented by the Russians. That is something that is in their gift, because remember, there's an asymmetry in this war when it comes to that. The Ukrainians are not attacking Russian civilian infrastructure inside Russia. They're not attacking civilians, so he can do that. But I don't think it's going to change anything on the ground. In the Donbass particularly, what President Zelensky was talking about, the fighting, the artillery battles are still likely to go on there. Now, domestically, for Vladimir Putin, he has a win either way with this. He can position himself as taking the moral high ground to his audience inside Russia, saying that, you know, this war isn't a war of choice. We have to fight this war. And look, here we are offering them a ceasefire on this very special day. It's Orthodox Christmas Eve today, Christmas Day tomorrow, and it's being rejected by the Ukrainians. They're that type of people, so we need to carry on fighting. The other thing, of course, that he's probably very worried about is that Russia has had significant losses of personnel over the last few weeks. According to the Ukrainians, in one hit a few days ago, they killed 400 Russian soldiers. Now, these are Russian soldiers that have just been mobilised. President Putin has a severe manpower shortage, and it's likely as we move further into the new year that he's going to have to mobilise again just to keep the war going at the level that he is doing at the moment. So he does have a few problems. Of course, offering this ceasefire, he would have hoped, would have given him some breathing room, which has been reflected also by the Americans. They are saying that this, again, is just hypocrisy. It is a ruse. President Biden saying that he's doing it because he needs oxygen. The Russians are in trouble here, and it looks as we go further into this new year, there's questions about how they're going to get out of that.
Indeed, Alex, thanks very much indeed. Now here, train passengers are looking at yet another day of disruption, with rail workers starting another 48-hour strike in its long-running dispute over pay and conditions. In some areas, there are going to be no trains at all. So let's get a sense of the picture now. Sky's Aisha Zahid is at Paddington Station for us this morning. So, Aisha, people are getting used to these strikes now. It's been such a week of them. What level of service can people expect today, and how soon might this all be over?
Well, we're currently on day 4 of 5 of strike action when it comes to the railways, and about 20% of normal services will be running, and that's because it's the RMT union this time around staging their 48-hour walkout, the second 48-hour walkout of the week. And then yesterday we had the drivers' union ASLEF taking strike action as well. So more disruption. Like you said, I think people are used to what they should expect to see when the strike action does take place. So it has been really quiet here, but where services are running, they are limited. Schedules are reduced, trains taking off later in the morning, and then services ending earlier in the day compared to usual as well. So the message from train operators really is to, first of all, check if trains are running in your area before you plan to head out, but also only to travel if it is absolutely necessary. And are we any closer to seeing the unions strike any kind of deal? Well, talks will be resuming. It's expected early next week. So far, the unions have said that it's been the government blocking any type of negotiation and deal from being struck. That's something ministers have denied. But another move from the government yesterday, they confirmed new legislation around strikes, which would mean that minimum levels of service would need to be ensured during strike action. That will apply to various sectors, including the railways, and it's something that we should expect to see discussed in the Commons in the coming weeks, but that won't help for now. There is this significant disruption over the course of the day, today, tomorrow, and then into Sunday as well.
Aisha, thanks very much indeed. So let's say good morning to Rob, our political correspondent. Hello to you, Rob. So Aisha was mentioning it there. The government has taken the step of giving a few more details for its anti-strike legislation that it wants to bring in. What's included in it, but what kind of impact could that have on the various disputes that are going on?
Well, it would mean that NHS staff, teachers, firefighters, rail workers as well would have to provide a minimum service level, and it would mean that employees that were asked to work under that and didn't could be sacked. It would mean that unions that didn't comply with those minimum service levels could be sued as well. So the government's very much saying this is about protecting lives, protecting livelihoods. There was some concern during the last ambulance strike about whether all major emergency category call-outs could be staffed during it. In reality, clearly, it's another part of really the manoeuvring and the ongoing battle that's sort of playing out between the government and unions. I think, though, it doesn't necessarily go as far as some people were expecting. There had been a lot of reporting that Rishi Sunak was thinking about changing the rules around ballot thresholds and things like that, or even saying that ambulance workers weren't allowed to strike, adding them to the lists of people like soldiers and police officers who are not allowed to strike. He hasn't gone that far. Some reporting that might have been because of concern that the whole package of legislation could have been held up by the Lords if he had. As Aisha was saying there, though, this won't do anything to change what's going on at the moment and the current strikes that are happening today on the railways, and also later this month we'll get a walkout by NHS workers as well. And in terms of that dispute that's going on between the Royal College of Nursing and the government, overnight the Times newspaper, the Times radio has heard from the Royal College of Nursing who have said that they would be willing to accept a 10% pay rise to call off these strikes. Previously, the demand had been 19%. I think what's going on here from the RCN is they're trying to counter, really, this attack from the government that what they're asking for is unrealistic. I think in reality, though, the government's line isn't going to change, that they're not reopening the 2022 pay deal. They said they will sit down and have talks about the 2023 pay deal, but at the moment, the two sides still look so far apart that it's hard to see how there's a path to these strikes in just under 2 weeks being called off.
Indeed. OK, Rob, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. So let's take a look now at some of the day's other headlines. And research into new cancer treatments, including personalised vaccines, could be sped up. The government is due to sign a deal with the pharmaceutical company BioNTech, which worked with the COVID vaccine. It's hoped that similar immunotherapies could be deployed against cancer in the coming decades. After 3 days and 11 rounds of voting, the US House of Representatives still doesn't have a speaker. The Republican Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, hasn't been able to get enough votes from his party, which narrowly controls the chamber. One McCarthy critic even voted for Donald Trump, a symbolic but pointed sign of deep divisions. Mexican security forces have recaptured the son of the drug lord El Chapo. Ovidio Guzman's arrest triggered gunfights in the country's northwest, where police say that members of his cartel shot at commercial planes at the airport. The 32-year-old was last captured in 2019, but was released to stop a wave of violent retribution. His father is serving a life sentence in the US. The man accused of killing 4 students in the US state of Idaho has appeared in court, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Brian Kohberger was extradited to the state after his arrest more than 2,000 miles away in Pennsylvania last week. It comes as authorities reveal that they found a knife sheath with the 28-year-old's DNA on it at the scene. Do stay with us still to come here on the show. As the Republicans struggle to elect a new House Speaker, I'll be joined by former Ambassador to the US, Lord Darroch. Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, will be with me just after 8. And with some businesses claiming that they're suffering big losses as a result of the rail strikes, I'll speak to the Chief Executive of UK Hospitality, Kate Nichols. Now, with the NHS coming under unprecedented strain this winter, nearly half of parents say that they don't feel confident about getting quick day-to-day medical care for their children. A poll by the website Mumsnet also found that a third were unable to get a GP appointment for their child in the previous 3 months. Well, I'm joined now by the Chair of the Royal College of GPs, Professor Camilla Hawthorne. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. First, perhaps it's useful for you to give us an idea of the kind of pressures that GPs are under. Give us a sense of what an average GP's working day looks like.
OK, I think, first of all, I really wanted to say how sad we are to see these survey results, because we want parents to have confidence in the NHS and in NHS services. And certainly GPs and their teams pull out all the stops possible to see children to make sure they get timely and appropriate care. So a GP's day nowadays is unbelievably busy. It's common for GPs to see between 40 and 60 patients in a day, which is really not sustainable and sometimes not very safe. I was talking to my brother-in-law yesterday, who is a GP in Farnham, and by tea time, he'd already dealt with 140 patients, which is way more than I've ever heard before. So it's a really, really busy, pressurized atmosphere. It starts at about 7:30 or 8 in the morning. It can often go on till 8 in the evening. GPs will then go home, have a quick bite to eat, and then get onto their laptops to do all the paperwork that's accumulated as a result of seeing all these patients. So it is, at the moment, we're working absolutely full tilt. Now, it isn't because GPs are not seeing patients because they don't want to. They really do want to, and it's a source of enormous frustration for us to feel that we're not able to do our job in the way that we would like to. And that's because there just aren't enough GPs due to years of underfunding and poor workforce planning. And in a way, the COVID pandemic, followed by strep A, followed by influenza, is just highlighting the nature of the problem.
So GPs are feeling stretched. According to this poll, a large number of people feel that they struggle to get an appointment for their children. So what's the solution?
Well, the solution really is to have a bigger workforce. You know, we need at least 6,000 more GPs. That's what the government manifesto said in 2019, to be delivered by 2024. So they're way behind on that because, in fact, the numbers of GPs are actually dropping. So we're now about 700 short of where we were 2 years ago. We're not increasing in numbers. And a lot of that is due to burnout and people leaving the profession early. And what we really need is better retention strategies for GPs to keep people in the job and working, seeing patients in the way that they would like to do.
Well, yes, and in fact, in the Mumsnet poll, 86% said that they blamed the government for the crisis in the NHS. Do you agree then?
Yes, I think that it's been a number of factors, really. You can't blame the government for COVID-19 or for strep A, but those have really just highlighted the underlying shortage in workforce. And we've been warning the government about this for at least a decade, probably longer, that numbers of GPs were falling and that this was going to become a crisis. And also that in order to run a functioning health service, you need a robust general practice. You need to have a good primary care service. And there's very good evidence from across the world that countries that have a good functioning primary care service have a much healthier population.
We're seeing walkouts by nurses and ambulance staff. Is there a mood amongst GPs for industrial action? Do GPs want to strike?
No, I don't think they do at the moment. It's not really our function as a Royal Medical College to comment on terms and conditions of work. So it's not really within our remit to comment on this, and we wouldn't normally discuss it. But speaking anecdotally, I've not heard of a concerted move amongst GPs wanting to go on strike at the minute.
However, beyond the strikes amongst nurses and ambulance workers, do you think it's likely that we could see more widespread walkouts amongst other healthcare workers?
I think there is just so much pressure on healthcare staff right across the NHS. And it's really important that staff feel able to do their job properly to the standards that they're trained for and under the right conditions. And that is really, I think, what is underlying a lot of the dissent and discontent that we have currently.
And I wonder if you have a view on the ongoing dispute with the nurses. We have seen reported this morning by the Times newspaper that Pat Cullen, the head of the RCN, the nurses' union, saying that she might be prepared to meet the government halfway, would look at an offer of around 10%, even though the nurses' unions asked for 19% originally. What do you make of that, and do you feel that progress could be made?
I really hope so. I think no NHS worker wants to strike. It doesn't matter who or what you are within the NHS. Resolution is the best thing for everybody concerned, and of course, particularly for our patients. It's not for us to get into details of what this might look like, I'm afraid. But I think whatever happens, it's absolutely essential that we all work together to minimise the impact on patient safety.
Well, Professor Camilla Hawthorne, a chair of the Royal College of GPs, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Do stay with us here on Sky News Breakfast. Coming up, as Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer set out their competing visions for the country, we'll ask what the future holds for British politics. So it's been a big week in politics, with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer both delivering their party's visions for the year ahead. So let's take a look back then, shall we, with the former Labour Party advisor James Meadway and former aide to David Cameron, Sarah Southern. So very good morning to both of you. Sarah Southern, to you first of all, 2 speeches to kick off the year. Which leader do you think did a better job at laying out what he's all about?
Well, certainly the leader that made it a little bit more exciting was Keir Starmer. I was delighted to see that his team had obviously done a number of recce's and found somewhere exciting and interesting to do the speech. It was wonderful to see it looking so interesting rather than the kind of staid, boring background that the Prime Minister opted for. I think what was interesting is Rishi Sunak obviously laid out these 5 very clear pledges of what he wants to do, many of which I think we would hope would happen regardless. You know, let's hope that the economy grows. Let's hope that NHS waiting lists are reduced. But it felt as though Keir Starmer really placed himself as the change candidate, that he's kind of not weighed down by former prime ministers and such like. He can actually present what he in a Labour government would want.
Well, yes, I mean, do you agree with that, James Meadway? I mean, both of them really talked about change. Rishi Sunak keen to make sure that he makes a clear distinction from the prime ministers that have gone before him as well. Who did it more successfully, do you think?
Well, it was, I mean, Rishi Sunak had a kind of speech in 2 halves. He had to say in the first bit what he was going to do about the mess that we're currently in. And he had to talk about it in a way that didn't implicate himself or the governments that he's been a part of or the party that's been in government for a significant period of time. So it's a difficult job. The 5 pledges, I mean, they don't actually add up to very much. Inflation, which he wants to halve by the end of the year. The Bank of England forecasts say inflation is going to halve anyway by the end of the year. Economic growth going up again. Well, if the government does nothing, you kind of anticipate that happening regardless. It doesn't add up to very much. The second half of the speech, where he talked about his vision, centering on innovation and some elements of, you know, how we must have strong communities. I mean, fine as far as it goes. Frankly, I think the talk about innovation and the way he phrases this is a little bit passé. It's a bit sort of, you know, 2000s Blair speak, really, that Sunak sometimes channels. So the speech in 2 halves without the 2 halves joining up together. Starmer did a better job of presenting a kind of integrated vision of this. And he can do that because he's not been in government, so he has a critique of what government's doing. And I think some interesting things to say below the headlines about Labour's concern to present itself as not spending too much, about what it will do about the longer term problems and the structural issues. So we had quite a lot of attack lines on the Westminster system, not just the Conservative Party, but the whole sets of institutions we have in Westminster that Labour says it's going to start trying to reform, with devolution, with the Gordon Brown proposals, with this Take Back Control bill. So really quite a contrast in the 2 approaches. Sunak, of course, is somewhat hampered by actually being Prime Minister and things being in a right old state at the moment.
Well, yes, and Sarah, I mean, OK, some similarities there and some contrast. To what extent are we, though, seeing a coming together onto the centre ground of the 2 candidates? How different, really, are the 2 different prospects?
Well, I think that's very, very interesting that we now do have 2 quite centred around candidates. You know, if you look at where we were, well, 3 years ago before Starmer came in, we obviously had Corbyn and Johnson, who were very much towards the other extremes of the parties. So I think we are going to see them coming closer and closer together. I think also, as we're in such a difficult time here in the UK at the moment, it's kind of less time for kind of radical ideologies and more for solutions and helping people out and making sure that people do have more money in their pockets, that they're able to access the NHS more easily. So I don't think we're going to see people going to the extremes anymore. I think we are going to see people coming swiftly towards the centre ground.
Well, yes, and Sarah, Rishi Sunak has said that the 5 pledges that we've talked about were the people's priorities. Do you think he has hit the nail on the head there? Or do you think there are people that are saying these aren't actually our biggest concerns? What about the pressures on the health service? What about the strikes up and down the country? Is that a problem for him, do you think?
I think anyone going to work this week who has either had to work from home or has taken 2 hours to get to work because of the train strikes will probably see the strikes very high up, in the same way anyone who's waiting for a minor operation and that's been delayed or whatever it may be may think you need to sort the NHS out. We've seen what's happened with all of the delays in people waiting for ambulances over the Christmas period. People will want that to be sorted out, and I'm sure that that is at the top of the priority list for the Health Secretary going into 2023. But at the end of the day, the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis is what's going to really hit people hard in the coming months.
Well, yes, and Sir Keir Starmer, James Meadway, his job's a lot easier in many ways, isn't it? He's ahead in the polls. He's also not under pressure to deliver immediately. But how does that affect how much he promises? I mean, it's going to be some time before he could be in power. So how much do you say now, and how much is there a risk that any ideas you do put out there could get stolen?
Well, I think Starmer's spent actually quite some time kind of introducing himself. I'm sure people watching this programme will be broadly familiar with his personal story, which he touched on a bit yesterday by this point, and not so much time saying what Labour might actually do. Now, that started to change, I think, at party conference last year with some big promises on setting up a new publicly owned renewable electricity generation company, the green transformation, the large amounts of investment going into that. And that was all repeated yesterday. So he's starting to set out the stall a bit. What was interesting about this speech, I thought, was that it was less the policy sort of elements there, which is mostly a repetition of things he said already, and more the framework of how he wants us to think about what's going wrong with the country, which isn't just the Conservative Party in power is a problem. I mean, obviously he's going to say this, it's Labour, right? They're going to say that. But also this sort of institutional issues. And I think he's kind of right on this. If you look at just how bad the British economy is doing relative to our nearest competitors, our peer economies in Europe, wherever it might be, we really are in a very bad state at this point. There is a need for longer term, bigger changes. And that's the kind of point I think that Starmer's trying to get to. And I think we'll hear more from him over this year about what those bigger structural long-term changes that Labour wants to make might start to look like. Sunak doesn't have the same ability to talk like this. He can say vaguely at some point in the future, once I've cleaned up this mess, which incidentally I've had no part in causing, by the way, where things are going to be great with loads of innovation and strong communities. He can't make the same deep structural critique in the same way that Starmer has. And I think if Starmer gets the language right around this, that's potentially quite an attractive and hard to challenge offer for the next election at the end of 2024, let's say.
And very briefly, a thought from both of you. Sarah, first of all, we heard that Rishi Sunak had rushed his speech forward to try to be ahead of Keir Starmer's. How worried is he about the competition? How concerned is he about this Labour leader?
I think this is just a sign that we're very much onto general election footing, even if it is 2 years away. It wouldn't really sit well with the Prime Minister that the Leader of the Opposition is laying out his stall ahead of him. I remember in 2010, David Cameron gave a speech, I think, on either New Year's Day or the 2nd of January to make sure that he got out there ahead of Gordon Brown. So I think it's not surprising that as soon as Rishi Sunak got wind that Keir Starmer was making his speech yesterday, that he went for the day before.
OK, and very briefly from you, James, what your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think Prince Harry has trumped both of them. That's what people are talking about this morning. And probably the government's rather grateful that Keir Starmer's probably suffered more as a result of this. But, you know, politics is like that sometimes. These things turn up and that's what's going to occupy people's attention right now.
That's the nature of news, isn't it? Well, James Meadway and Sarah Sutton, thanks very much indeed for talking us through those speeches. Really interesting to get your take on it. Thank you. Now, the US House of Representatives has adjourned after failing to elect a new Speaker for the 11th time. Now, it's the first time in a century that a nominee hasn't been chosen on the first vote. The Republican Party leader, Kevin McCarthy, has failed in every round to secure the 218 votes needed to win. So let's get some reaction to that. I'm joined now by former British Ambassador to the US, Lord Darroch. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. So 3 days, 11 votes, still no US House Speaker. How's this all going to end, do you think?
Good question, Anna. Thank you for inviting me. As you said, this is almost unprecedented. I think it's more than a century since something like this has happened. There are 20 standouts in the Republican Party, mostly from the far right of the party, who are refusing to endorse Kevin McCarthy. And because the Republicans have such a narrow majority in the House, that's enough to mean he can't get to his 218 votes. And we've been through 11 rounds, and it's hard to see how this is going to be resolved because they're not shifting, and there is no sign that they're going to. He's made the most extraordinary concessions to them, still no sign they're going to shift. There isn't really an alternative candidate out there. Because remember, McCarthy gets the support of almost 200 of the Republicans in the House. These 20 don't seem to have an alternative candidate, certainly not one who could command majority support amongst the Republican Party. So I don't see where this goes next. McCarthy may be able to make some more concessions, but he's already conceded so much. What more can he do? So it's an interesting question.
Well, yes, and presumably with concessions come problems. I mean, if McCarthy does manage to offer enough to convince the doubters and he does become US Speaker, does that affect the amount of power that he would have?
Absolutely. I mean, it is said that some of the concessions he's offered are places on the most important committees to some of these hard right Republican congressmen, but also that a tiny number, maybe only 5 of them, could demand a vote on the replacement of the Speaker. So he has already massively weakened his own position should he actually get the job. And it's hard to see how much further he can go when he's offered these sort of things.
What about Donald Trump's intervention? He's come out and said to those people who don't want to back Kevin McCarthy, you should do it, go ahead and do it. What difference might that make?
Well, the information so far is it's made very little difference because he has said that, and the 20-odd who are refusing to back McCarthy are mostly strong supporters of Donald Trump. But what we're seeing actually is the first manifestation of the struggle for the future of the Republican Party, for the soul of the Republican Party. Traditionally, the Republican Party is the party of low taxes, small government, free trade, strong alliances overseas. The Trump Republican Party stood for sort of culture wars and chaos. And where does it go in future? There's lots of signs that Trump's influence over the party is waning. And Trump has done badly in the last 3 elections in which he has been involved. So, you can argue he really isn't the future, but what is the future of the Republican Party? And we're seeing that struggle start now.
So that question being examined now, and meanwhile, today is January the 6th, so it's 2 years since the attack on the Capitol building. Where's that left the US, do you think, with reflection? Any long-term effects, do you think, of what happened then?
First of all, we need to see whether that Senate committee report, 600-odd pages of it, some really damning stuff about the former president's influence over and incitement of the attack of 6 January on the Capitol. Where that goes, there is still, it's for the Justice Department to decide, but it's far from impossible that criminal proceedings against the former president will now be initiated. We'll see. But second, this was an attack on American democracy. For a while, it was on the edge. Remember, the rioters got quite close to the room where then Vice President Mike Pence was hiding. It was an extraordinary and appalling event. 6 people died. And it really put a question over stability and solidity of American democracy. Now, I think American democracy survived that and will survive, but the Republican Party really need to have to think about where they stand on this, because a number of the candidates, including some of those who are now holding out against Kevin McCarthy, supported that riot. One of them, Marjorie Taylor Greene, said if she had been in charge, the rioters would have been armed and they would have succeeded. So there's some pretty extreme views in the Republican Party which they really need to think about. I don't think people like that should be allowed to run for election again.
And I wonder, since we have you here, whether I can get your views on another topic which is obsessing the news headlines, and that is the imminent release of Prince Harry's book and the fact that it was apparently accidentally put into shops in Spain briefly. One of the revelations that's come out concerns his time in Afghanistan. Some military experts this morning raising some concerns about security after he revealed in this memoir that he killed 25 Taliban fighters. As a former national security advisor, do you share those concerns?
Slightly. Look, you have to respect all of those who fought in Afghanistan. I went there a number of times when I was national security advisor. It's a really tough environment. It was a really dangerous war. We lost more than 500 British servicemen. So it was, to respect and appreciate all those who fought there. Personally, if I'd been advising the Prince, I would have advised against the kind of detail that he goes into there. But, it's out there now, and, I believe it was a just war, and therefore, what he has written about, how he justified to himself what he was doing, I can understand and appreciate that. But in terms of the detail, I personally wouldn't have gone there, but it's done now.
And do you think now there's a greater risk to his personal safety or to that of his family?
I'm not sure about that. He will have and will continue to have security, and I think that's right that he should. Whether there's a greater risk because of what he said, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You'd need to look into things and try and do a proper assessment of that rather than make a snap judgment. And I'm not sure, actually, the Taliban think they have enough problems themselves in Afghanistan where they are proving to be, as expected, appalling and repressive rulers to worry about someone who's living over in America. But let's see.
Were you quite surprised to see how candid he was about his time in Afghanistan, just personally?
Personally, a little, but it's a very candid book, as we've all starting to realise from the extracts that have been leaked. But yes, I was personally a bit surprised, but it's out, so there we are.
Well, Lord Kim Darroch, so good to talk to you this morning. Thanks so much for sharing your views on a range of subjects this morning. We really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick look at what the weather's doing, shall we? Well, the mild and unsettled theme will continue, but today it will bring a good deal of fine weather. It's a mostly dry and clear start, but Scotland is windy and showery with severe gales in the north. Those showers will become more scattered throughout the morning. Coming up in the next hour on Sky News Breakfast, we'll have plenty more reaction to Prince Harry's new memoir, as well as further strikes today. We'll analyse that with Pat McFadden of Labour.